My most recent book is called The Mysterious Mr. Jacob, and Mr. Jacob was, as the title implies, a very mysterious man who lived in India from about 1865 until he died in 1921. Now, he was an interesting character for me because he became a minor celebrity in his time, yet probably not well known to most people. That is, unless you happen to be a fan of Rudyard Kipling, because Kipling met Jacob in Simla in about 1883 and was so struck by him that he used him as a character in Kim. So anyone who's read Kim will remember Lurgan Saab, you know, the healer of sick pearls who runs the school for spies, where Kim learns the secrets of the great game. But in my research, I found out, you know, who this person really was, and he was a man who was born in Turkey, came to India when he was a teenager, arrived penniless, not knowing anyone, not being able to speak any of the local languages, and within about 15 years he was the most famous diamond merchant, magician and spy in the British Raj, and that's what formed the basis of the book. Look, it doesn't follow that format exactly, but yeah, I mean, I do of course go back to his origins, which were in Turkey, in a town called Diyarbakir, which is in southeastern Turkey. I went there, I found not his house, those sorts of records just don't exist, but I did find the school that he attended. I also, when I was in Turkey, found someone who had researched not his life specifically, but the life of his brother, and he came from a very interesting family anyway. That enabled me to piece together some facts about his early life. A lot of gaps probably remain to be filled because there wasn't much around about that time, but you know, he arrived in India, as I said, in about 1865, and the first records of his being in India when he was working for the Rana of Dholpur in 1872. No. Look, he was one of these people who liked to disguise his real origins. I mean, Kipling portrayed him, the way Kipling portrayed him, he could have been Jewish. He was variously portrayed as everything from Italian, Persian, Polish, Greek, Russian. Somebody described him as a gypsy, Italian. He himself described himself as an Italian, which wasn't true. And by religion, as I said, some people, people variously thought he was Muslim, a Parsi, a Catholic. In fact, he was a Syrian Catholic and born in Turkey. So, and that only came out, that took a long time to pin that down. No, look, I've had to, in places, take some educated guesses, put it that way, about what he was doing at certain times. He did his best to cover his tracks, and although there are files around, and and I'll talk about it later, things that happened which boosted his notoriety, if you like. There was quite, a lot of it was conjecture, but tried to stay faithful as I can to the historical record, whatever there is. Oh, look, researching the book took me quite a few years, really. I mean, as one does, you search around for snippets of information. You kind of get as much as you can from, say, the internet, and then any information that's accessible to you where you are, and then you need to go to London to look through the India office records. You need to go to Turkey. You need to come to India, of course, to look through the National Archives here, and to go to Simla where he lived, Calcutta as well. And so basically following, I followed in his footsteps as much as I could. Well, that's an interesting question. Yeah, look, he was, he spied for the British, but the British also thought that he was spying for the Russians. I mean, this is the time of the Great Game, okay? The contest for influence and in Central Asia, Afghanistan, of course, being at the center of that. He was a jeweler primarily, okay, and in order to be a successful jeweler and gem trader, diamond merchant, various, whatever you want to call it, he needed to have a network of his own spies in various royal courts, because he needed to know if the Maharaja of say Bikaner was falling on hard times, or whether who was sleeping with who in a state in Gujarat, or who was who was in trouble, or who needed to offload a bunch of jewels and might be going cheap. So he had this incredible network of agents and spies, really, who would bring him. He was an antique dealer as well as a jeweler, so they would bring him things as well as bring him information as to what was going on. So he needed to know the price of turquoises in the markets of Peshawar. He needed to know, the latest diamond finds in Andhra Pradesh, or the market for rubies in Burma. That was essential for him to be able to carry out his business. So he used this network to feed information to the British when it suited him, and he used that pretty much so he could get, because he knew that in exchange for that information he would have access, and he had access to the highest in the land. He had access to viceroys and lieutenant generals and field marshals and whatever, the civil servants, the highest echelons of the Raj. But at the same time, the British were suspicious of him. His dealings with the princely states were, not. They were afraid he might have too much influence, and they certainly were jealous of his connections. I mean, at that time, Britain's spy agency was still called the Thuggee and Dacoitry Department, and it was, something. It was still a hangover from what William Sleeman had set up in the 1830s, to counter the Thuggee threat, and it was very underdeveloped. So compared to what the British had, his network was far superior. Well, I mean, he of course was, his primary concern, as I said, was trading in gems, and his clients, his customers were, primarily India's princes, and his most important customer was the Nizam of Hyderabad, who was the richest prince in India, of course. And he heard in about 1888 that the largest cut diamond in the world, which had just been exhibited at the Paris exhibition, was up for sale. And he thought that he could get it cheap and sell it to the Nizam, who was a young ruler, who would be dazzled by, jewels, that anything that came his way, the bigger the bauble, the better. That he would be the obvious person to be able to sell this diamond to. So he concocted this transaction and initially offered the diamond to the prince for 12 million rupees, dropped the price to 5 million, and then they settled on 4.6. But in the end, the British, the Nizam paid a deposit but refused to hand over the balance, and in the meantime the British convinced the prince to take Jacob to court for criminal misappropriation. He claimed that he was being cheated in the deal, and although this led to a long protracted court case in which Jacob was acquitted, but it ruined his reputation, and his fortunes went steadily downhill from there. Look, I studied Indian history. It was years ago, and I keep coming back here. You know, in India is a repository of perhaps the world's largest repository of you know, incredible untold stories. You know, there's a wealth of fascinating characters who've, you know, sprung up in Indian history. Some of them, you know, very well known, others more obscure, and you know, God knows how many biographies have been written on Gandhi, but you know, there's probably, you know, groundbreaking biographies still keep coming out, even though this man has been, you know, more has been written on him than probably any other individual perhaps in history, but still. I think there's a new one out that just deals with his early days as a lawyer in South Africa. I won't be writing a biography on Gandhi, but you know, there are other characters in Indian history who, they might be, you know, Indians themselves, or they might be British who've, you know, come to India, or they might be people like Jacob who were, you know, not certainly, you know, didn't go into the mainstream.